I received a couple of keyboards from CIDOO, and today we'll be taking a close look at the smaller of the two, the V65. Watch out for the next video where I'll be covering the V87. The exact naming on the V65 gets kind of confusing as different sources call it different names. In the manual, it's just referred to as the V65. On the CIDOO website, it's the V65 Pro. On the board itself and on the sticker on the box, it's called the V65 V2. For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to call it the V65. Cool? Cool. The CIDOO V65 is a gasket-mounted 65% dual-mode keyboard with an aluminum case, polycarbonate plate, rotary encoder, and lots of foam. You've got the option to purchase it pre-assembled with keycaps and switches for $129 or bare bones for $119. It comes in 5 different case colors, but 3 of them are specific to the bare bones version, while the other 2 are specific to the fully assembled one. The fully assembled version comes with a specific set of die-sublimated PBT keycaps and a specific set of linear switches. I picked the fully assembled version in this gray color that matches the included keycaps. Aside from the V65 and V87, CIDOO's V line of keyboards also includes a 75% and numpad. On their website, you can also find more keyboards, switches, and accessories. CIDOO seems to be related with EpoMaker in some way, based on the @EpoMaker support email on their website and the fact that CIDOO keyboards are also sold on EpoMaker's website. If you want to pick up the V65 or anything else from the CIDOO website, I'll leave affiliate links in the description. I was quite pleasantly surprised by the look of this keyboard when I first pulled it out of the box. It looks really good. I love the gray of the case, and it matches perfectly with the included keycaps. The aluminum has a nice texture and there are some very interesting design details. On the top case, you've got this sort of 2-tier design along the top and bottom edges. Everything is nicely beveled and smooth. On the bottom case, you've got these indented lines running through the middle. On the sides, you've got these big indentations where you can place your fingers when lifting up the board. This is a nice touch as this is a pretty heavy keyboard. The included Quark matte switches are 5-pin linears with nylon housings, palm dust-proof stems, and long 20mm springs with a 60-gram bottom out. Opening one of these up proves quite interesting. First, you'll immediately be struck by how long this 20mm spring is. It also seems to be a 2-stage spring, which is not something I've encountered before. After reading a bit on it, it seems like the main feature of these types of springs is a snappier/faster upstroke. I don't really notice much of a difference compared with more conventional springs. Next, you'll see some lube on the stem rails and stem legs. To my ears, there are no unpleasant sounds coming from these switches. Nothing scratchy, rattly, metallic, or pingy. I would be completely fine using these stock. Next, there's a pretty prominent slot for inserting light diffusers for RGB lighting. The V65 comes with 66 of these light diffusers, enough to cover all of the included switches. A downside to this feature is that the housing has to be pretty thin around this point where a switch puller would push when you're pulling switches. That part bends quite a bit and it does make me a bit nervous that it might break. The included keycaps are PBT with die-sublimated legends in the cherry profile. You've got some colored accent keys here that are reverse die sub. All of the printing is quite clean. The keycap material is thick with a slight texture. Overall, the aesthetic is very nice and clean. The font is good looking and the bottom left placement of the legends is very well done. Usually stock keycaps on pre-built keyboards like this are kind of just an afterthought, but these are very impressive. Let's tear this board down to see what we'll find. First, let's remove the keycaps and switches. This reveals the polycarbonate plate, which does not have any flex cuts. The V87, on the other hand, does have them. And if you look at the product images for the bare bones version of the V65, you'll also see flex cuts. The stabilizers here are plate mounted and do come with a tiny bit of lube pre-applied. Flipping the board over, you won't find any visible screw holes. Those are hidden underneath the board's rubber feet. Unfortunately, these feet are attached with adhesive, so you will have to pull these off when opening up the board. I've removed and reapplied these several times, and they still do stay on just fine. If you encounter any problems, the board does also come with extra feet. You've got 4 hex screws here that you can unscrew using the included tool. Flip the board over and make sure you've got the knob pulled off before removing the top case piece. You can now see the thick pour-on gasket strips attached with adhesive along the perimeter of the plate. Underneath the plate, you'll find some thick pour-on plate foam and a layer of sound-enhancing foam. I'm not actually sure what this is made of, but I'm just going to assume it's PE foam and call it that. The PCB has south-facing hot swap sockets and does support screw-in stabilizers. Unfortunately, the plate is made for plate-mounted stabilizers. This means that you'd need stabs with thinner housings, like C3 stabs or the ones that come stock with the V87. Durock V2s will technically fit in the holes, but they throw the plate out of alignment and you won't be able to put switches in. You'd probably have to cut around the holes to make them bigger if you really wanted to use Durock V2s. The PCB does not have any flex cuts, which I suspect makes any kind of flex cut on the plate kind of pointless. Next, let's remove the PCB. Be careful when doing this as there are a couple of cables attached to the PCB, one for the daughter board and the other for the battery. If you're doing this with switches still inserted, you will have to remove the switch for the number 3 key as it does get in the way of the daughter board cable. Inside the bottom case cavity, you'll find another thick sheet of case foam as well as a separate thinner sheet. Underneath these are the daughter board and battery. A big selling point for these CIDOO keyboards seems to be that they're VIA compatible. This was pretty intriguing to me as these are wireless keyboards and I don't think I've seen any of those be VIA compatible. In order to use the V65 with VIA, you will need to download a JSON file and load it into VIA from the design tab, which you have to enable in the settings. The manual will tell you to go to CIDOO.com with 3 O's, but this is a Chinese language website. Instead, you can visit CIDOOtech.com, click downloads at the very top, then click download under the V65. Next, open the VIA web or desktop app, go to settings and toggle on the design tab. Go to the newly activated design tab and toggle on the option saying use V2 definitions. You can then click load and select your JSON file. Next, go to the configure tab and press the drop down at the top right. Select authorize new and the CIDOO V65 should appear here. You may notice that the keyboard layout shown here isn't exactly the same as the V65's. That's because these 3 keys at the top right represent the rotary encoder. The leftmost is for a counterclockwise turn, the middle is for a knob press, and the rightmost is for a clockwise turn. By default, it's set to control volume like most other keyboards with knobs, so you'll probably not have to even change this anyway. If you go to layer 1, you'll see the hotkeys described in the manual for doing things like switching between Bluetooth devices, switching between Windows and Mac modes, and controlling the RGB. If you want to move these functions to different keys, they're available in the section labeled Custom. Unfortunately, the labels here are all wrong. To find out what each of these functions actually does, you'll need to shift off the labels to the left. So the one labeled 2.4G mode actually functions as USB mode. The one labeled USB mode actually functions as Bluetooth 1, and so on. Hey, Future Kaloy here with an update. I didn't think of this at all while writing this script, but JSON files are pretty easy to understand and edit, so I just went in and fixed the thing. Just download and use my edited JSON file, which I've linked in the description, and all the labels should be fixed. I'm pretty sure this is perfectly safe, but you should still do this at your own risk. If there's any problems, please let me know in the comments. And now back to your regularly scheduled programming. Some of these functions don't even apply to the V65, like the LED logo ones and the 2.4G mode one. The one for USB mode does work, and does seem to be the only way to switch from wireless to wired mode, which is very strange. You would think that the physical toggle on the back of the keyboard, next to the USB port, would be the one to serve that purpose. According to the manual, that toggle is for switching the keyboard on and off, but I found that this isn't exactly the case. I can still use the board in wired mode with the toggle set to off. And while it's in the off position, if you try to switch to Bluetooth mode by selecting one of the 3 saved Bluetooth devices, the keyboard will connect and work via Bluetooth, but only as long as it's plugged in with a USB cable. Confused? Yeah, me too. Let me try to simplify this all. If you use the keyboard only as a Bluetooth keyboard, then you can just treat that switch like it's a regular on-off switch. If you use the board only as a wired keyboard, then you'll only have to use the hotkey to switch to USB mode once, and it should stay there regardless of the position of the physical toggle. If you use both wired and wireless modes, then it gets a little bit tricky. Just remember that it's the hotkeys that you'll need to use to switch between wired and wireless modes, and not the physical toggle. At first, the stabilizers on this sounded fine with just the factory lubing, but after putting the board through regular use, they do start ticking. So I just went in with a syringe to add more Krytox 205 grade 0. I also added all of the light diffusers to the switches, as it does make them easier to remove. These are the only modifications I've done to this board so far. In its stock form, the V65 is a pretty quiet keyboard, which is not that surprising considering the amount of foam there is inside of it. All of these sound tests have had a gain bump of 6 dB, and this does seem to reveal some pretty slight scratchiness to these switches. It's really not noticeable during normal use just because of how quiet the board sounds in general. I would also characterize the sound of it as leaning more toward a higher pitch. Next, let's remove the 2 sheets of case foam to see if that might make the board a little bit louder. To my ears, these 2 tests sound exactly the same. Let me know what you heard. The only effect that removing the case foam seems to have had is an increase in flexiness. This is not something that I can feel during normal typing, but it is a visible change. It might be worth giving a shot for you since it doesn't seem to affect sound. Before we go on to modding, let's just try removing the last piece of thick foam, the plate foam. We'll leave the PE foam in. We do get a slight increase in volume without the plate foam, but we also get some kind of metallic or hollow sound toward the bottom rows. It's especially audible on the spacebar. So let's put the plate foam back in and try the tape mod. I'm going to do 2 layers of tape here, which is what I always do. I asked in my mode tempo video if the tape mod is still something that people are doing and didn't receive any responses. Well, I'm gonna keep doing it because it just works. Tape mod remains winning. The board gets a little bit louder, which is quite welcome considering how quiet it was originally, and the pitch gets lower too, which is something that I prefer. The last thing I'd like to try is putting different switches in to see if it's mainly the switches that are quiet. I'll be trying stock Mode Tomorrow switches as well as lubed JWick blacks. In terms of loudness, there's really not much of a difference that I can discern here. The JWick blacks are maybe a little bit louder. The V65 seems to just be a quiet keyboard in general. At the end of the video, I'll try these 2 sets of switches out with different keycap sets and a couple of extended sound tests, so please stick around for that. I'm gonna be honest with you, when I agreed to receive these keyboards from CIDOO, I really wasn't expecting much. I expected the V65 to be just another pre-built keyboard, like all of the ones I had previously tried. Well, I was wrong. The CIDOO V65 is a beautiful, well-constructed, feature-packed keyboard. I feel like getting the pre-built version is a no-brainer because you only have to add $10 and you get some really high-quality switches and keycaps. The mislabeled functions in VIA did provide quite the headache for me, but luckily for you, I sorted it all out already so you won't have to go through that. And once it's all set up, you probably won't even need to go back to VIA anymore. As for sound, it is quite muted, but it doesn't sound bad at all. For $129, you're getting a hefty aluminum case, Bluetooth, and the aforementioned quality keycaps and switches. I think that's quite a steal, and I would highly recommend the CIDOO V65. And that concludes my look at the CIDOO V65. What do you think about this keyboard? Has this video convinced you to get one? If you already own one, has your experience matched up with mine? Let us know in the comments. And like I said, I'll be taking a look at the V87 in my next video, so please stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching.